Right. So, yeah, because Laurie, you said I had to do the intro, didn't you? So,
Sure.
so welcome to World Childless Week. I think we're the first webinar, and thank you for coming to what we can learn from our family history. When Laurie asked me to do this, I thought, yep, I'm in it. I love my ancestry. I love the family trees, and I hope that we can inspire you to perhaps look at it from a different perspective. So my name's Michael Hughes. I'm part of the Full Stop podcast. I previously was a World Childless Week ambassador and a passionate childless man. Well, half of a childless marriage. Yeah, so, and I live in Australia, and it is just past 9 o'clock here in Monday night. And so, yeah, look, Laurie, tell us about yourself as well.
Hi. Well, I'm Lori, and I live north of Toronto. Um, I have been around the childless community for quite a long time. I have been blogging for almost 17 years. I'm at the Road Less Traveled is the name of my blog, and some of you may know me there as Lori Beth, which is my pen name. Um, yes, my childless story would include stillbirth, infertility treatments, which we ended when I was 40 years old in 2001. And I've been hanging around the childless community ever since then. There wasn't a lot out there in 2001, but there were a few places. I am still in touch with some of the women that I met in my original childless community. Hi, if you're watching out there. And yeah, and it's just wonderful to see how the community has grown and expanded, and so many voices out there now speaking for us, which is great to see. As far as genealogy goes, I guess we'll get into that a little more, but I've been interested in it for a long, long time. I've been researching on and off for 45 years. And again, that's just amazing too with the internet, the way it's just exploded what's available out there now. And I just keep thinking about my grandfather and how amazed he would be to see all the things that you can learn now about your family and all the things that I have found out about our family since he's been gone. So
Yeah, so what we want to share is how this activity is being one way in which has helped us come to terms with our childlessness, and how it has also helped with some of the issues that are common to our community. Things like legacy, things like purpose, and some normalizing of some aspects of being childless. But it's also fun. And yeah, that's what we're going to sort of work our way through is how, yeah, our experience with that. And we'll be sharing lots of stories because, well, I'm an old bugger and I tell stories because that's what you do when you get old. So, so Laurie, I'm interested to know. Well, Laurie and I have talked a lot about our family trees, and you have a really lovely story about family letters.
yes. Yeah, the family letters. That is sort of how my whole interest in the family history began. Um, my family came to, or this particular branch of it, my mother's father's family and his father's family came to North America in the 1860s from, well, from Scotland. My great great grandfather was born in Ireland, but they went to Scotland in the late 1840s and then came to North America with my great great grandmother's parents and her sister. They were in New York State for a little while, and then they came north to Canada to a little town north, about an hour, hour and a half north of Toronto called Beaverton on Lake Simcoe. And then from there, my great grandparents and their kids went west and ultimately settled in the Red River Valley of the North in Minnesota near the Canadian border. They wrote letters back to the parents and the sister in Ontario describing, their trip, what it was like living in this new country, the farming conditions. There was a letter about Sitting Bull and his braves dancing in the streets of the town where I was born, 80, 90 years later. It just absolutely fascinating stuff. And for anybody, and there were all kinds of little references to Pa's brother in Dundee and uh, just little hints along the way, names of people. And I was curious, who were these people? And so I read these letters that and the story goes that they, of course, they went back to Beaverton. The parents there eventually died in the late 1890s, of course. The daughter, they begged her, they said, come and live with us out west. She stayed in Beaverton by herself, was never married, and kept these letters. When she died in 1949, one of my grandfather's cousins went to Beaverton, and he found these letters and brought them back with him. And eventually they were loaned to a local history project. They were transcribed and copies were circulated in the family. So that's how I got to read the letters years later. And that sort of became the basis. Everybody in our family read these. We're very proud of the role that our family played as some of the early settlers in that area. My grandfather was very proud and knew a lot about the history. He knew everybody in the area. And so these letters were sort of the way that they were sort of the catalyst for my interest in the family tree. And then when I got older, I started doing the actual research and to fill in some of the blanks and start to learn more about these people who were in the letters. Did you want me to talk a little about Maggie right now, or? Yeah. It turned out the woman who, the sister who collected the letters, as I think I mentioned, as it turns out, she never married. She never had children. She lived by herself in this little town. She died when she was 89 years old, 90 years old. My parents and I first visited this town in 1984. And we found her grave and her parents' graves in the cemetery there. She'd been dead for about 45 years by then. I'm not sure. We may have been the first people to visit, in 45 years. I don't know. But we found people in the town still remembered her. When we asked about, mentioned her name, they remembered her. And the funny thing is, the more I learned about her, I started to realize something was not quite clicking here. And that people would refer to your mother in the letters. And I thought, well, why didn't they say our mother or our grandmother? And I met up with a distant cousin, and she had a sort of a hand-drawn family tree, which indicated that this woman, whose name was Maggie, was adopted. She was not actually a blood relative. And so we did a little research, and I think we may have figured out who her biological parents actually were. But that's neither here nor there. But I just thought it was so touching and so interesting that this woman who had such an impact on our family history, who saved these letters lovingly, that it sort of became the basis of our family history, was not even a biological relative. So, and it just goes to show you that you never know what kind of an impact you're going to have on people. She was also apparently, they relied on, the woman who wrote the local history of the town relied on her heavily as a source for her book. So, and that, you know, that book is still in the local library there, even though it was written about 50 years ago or 60 years ago. So you never know. You never know. I'm sure she never dreamed that, you know, somebody would be visiting her grave. And I brought her flowers the last time I was there. So, you know, I'm sure she never would have dreamed that somebody would be visiting her grave 60 years later. So I just found that kind of heartening as a childless person myself.
Yeah, I know what you mean, because one of the things that and you and I have talked about is the cathartic nature of doing the family tree, where you're investigating all these different lines and branches of your family, but yeah, you find branches that stop, and you realize the impact of what that is. But at the same time, there's a catharsis there where you think, well, it's it's not nice, but it's I'm not the only one this has happened to. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. That has been one of my big takeaways. You know, as I you know, obviously in the early years of your childlessness, it's very, you know, you're still grieving. Um, and I know sometimes you might think, you know, what's the point, because there, you know, there's nobody coming after me. But um, this is still the way I look at it. It's my family. It's still my family. I'm still a part of it. Um, and even if I'm not growing the family tree further down the road, I can reach back and I can reattach some of those branches that have fallen by the wayside, that people have forgotten about or never known about. And that includes the stories of these childless people, who, you know, may have, you know, they may not have had children. So, you know, their little twig ends with them, as mine will as well. But they still have stories. They have names, they have stories. And some of those stories are fairly interesting if you can find out something about them. So, yeah.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I guess the catharsis for me comes from the fact that I'm one of many Michael Hugheses. We can we've traced back now the 1700s in Ireland. So my dad, his dad, his dad, his dad, his dad, his dad, his dad. And so part of my childlessness is that, in my mind, we were always going to have a son, and he was always going to be called Michael. And so, yeah, for that not to happen, is very sad, but again, cathartic to think, well, this is a situation, I just have to live with that. And it almost forces you to do that, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So, and one of the other things you talked about in the past, Laurie, is about ties to place, in how, this helps you tie yourself to a place. How important is that to you?
You know, it is important to me. I, as I said, you know, my family was among the early settlers in the late, this would have been the late 1870s when they came out to first to Manitoba and then to northwestern Minnesota, and they were some of the early settlers there. But like, you know, quite a few branches of my family on both sides that settled in that area. Um, Growing up, I moved around a lot. My father worked for one of the Canadian banks in the branches. And back then, in particular, you got transferred every few years. And, you know, if the boss said you're being transferred, you went if you still wanted a job. So, I mean, I grew up, I think we counted when my parents had their 25th wedding anniversary, we had lived in 11 different houses in 7 different towns in 2 different provinces. I know a lot of people have done a lot more than that. But it was still a lot, we were moving every 3 to 5 years when I was growing up. And so there was, it was kind of like a sense thing of, well, where is home and where do I feel most rooted? And that is that area where my family came from, is still where I feel a sense of home whenever I go there. Um, and that I probably, if I belong anywhere, and sometimes I sort of feel a little rootless, but if I belong anywhere, I feel like I belong there. Um, but it's also, it's interesting because if learning so much about family history, um, the place like there's they came from well, we thought they were Irish, and they are Irish. There is Irish in our family, but actually, they came direct from Scotland, and apparently way far back they were in England. So I've always felt attracted to things British and culture. So there's something to that. I don't know. On my other sides, my one grandmother was Swedish, and I've always been drawn to that. We celebrate Christmas in a Swedish way, and my father's side of the family is Ukrainian. So what's going on there, not to get too political, but what's going on over there sort of hits you in a different way, because I don't know personally who these people are, but I know there's family still back there, like relatives of my grandfather's. So yeah, you start to feel certain attachments and ties to certain places, even when you've never been there before. I found out as one story doing my research, um, and it's kind of a long story how it led there, but I learned that I have cousins in Australia, and I never would have dreamed that I had cousins in Australia. They're like fourth cousins kind of thing now, but they're still cousins, and we were able to fill in some blanks on that side of the family through that contact. And so now if I go to Australia, I have distant cousins I can meet up with, which is kind of cool. So
I totally understand that. I want to tell a story about, because one of the things about this whole ancestry thing are the stories that we uncover. And I was having a conversation with Katie Seppi some time ago. Yeah, because I knew she was in Utah. We're having a chat, and this will have some bearing on a question that we've got in the chat actually about how do you find records. And so anyway, I've found that. Well, actually, no. Let's go back a bit. Got an email from a production company in Utah saying your mother has relatives here in Utah. We're doing a TV show, and would she be willing to come across? Now, mum's in her 70s. Is this a scam? So I wrote back and said, look, my mum's in her 70s. She's not coming by herself if she's coming at all. I'm coming with her. You're paying. Didn't hear back from them. But the point is, there are relatives in Utah that we can see on our DNA lists. And anyway, started talking to Katie Seppi about this, and she said, "What's his name?" I said, "Well, his name is I think it was William Bench, but anyway, surname Bench." And she's, "Oh my God, you're kidding?" I said, "No." So he's like I think a third great uncle of mine. He left he became a Mormon in the UK, and then sailed across the Atlantic to the east coast of America, and then did the whole wagon train thing across to Utah, and then became quite quite well known in the Mormon Church, and actually wrote a lot of hymns. That Katie said, we were still singing these hymns when I was a kid in church. And so, again, some of the stories that you get from this are so awesome and so exciting to find. And so, how I found that was obviously Ancestry has a great library of resources. What happens around the world now is companies like Ancestry, MyHeritage, Family, I think Family Tree DNA may do it as well, but they actually vie for the rights to digitize old records. So governments now are saying, okay, here you are, you can have the rights to digitize these records, and that's how you find it. So the libraries in these companies now are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they're always adding more and more. So that's how you find that information now. And I'm just reading some of the questions in the chat. But yeah, so that would be one. I've also got another. Someone talks about how do you find out things when it's the end of a line, if there's no birth records or marriage records. Well, I've got someone like that in my tree. It's my mum's auntie, actually. We have been trying now for a good 10 years to find out about her auntie. Now we know she was born. We have a birth certificate for her. And we can find her on a census of 1930, a special census that the English government did around 1939, at the beginning of the Second World War, I guess to just find out who was still in the country. But after that, we can't find her. We can't find any death notices. We can't find any death certificates. We can't find her even on an index. And so we're still searching. So as time goes on, we are confident that we will get more information. But right now, we can't find any more about her. And I'd really love to find her before my mum passes away. But yeah, I don't hold out much hope for that right now.
Yeah. 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 About the question about, information. Yeah, there's more and more stuff. Not everything is online. There's more and more stuff coming online all the time, as Michael said. But there's still an awful lot of written records, handwritten records, gathering dust in old ledgers and files in courthouses and town halls and things like that, in churches. So all I can say is keep going back and going back every now and then, because things pop up out of the blue, and with information that you haven't seen before or haven't learned before. As far as like more recent relatives, there are privacy laws governing the release of records. Like in Canada right now, I think they've only just released the 1931 census. I know in the States, I think it's the 1950 census that they're up to now. And there's certain rules about the release of, somebody has to be dead for so long before they will make the the death records public. And a lot of the information that's online is just indexes. So you have to actually request the actual record from the government, whatever's holding it. But one thing I would suggest, one great tip is to join if you're really interested in this, is to join your local genealogy society or historical society, because you're talking to like-minded people. I'm a member of the Ontario Genealogy Society, and they sponsor all kinds of webinars. They have special discounts on things like memberships for some of these MyHeritage and sites like that. They have an annual conference with speakers. There's all kinds of resources that you can get access to and get help with. So that's one tip.
Yeah, so we've got a question. How do you sit with assumptions made about any childless ancestors? I have since tried to reframe the stories I have heard for myself. I have a great aunt who could not have a child. The husband went on to father a child from their maid, and everyone says that they jointly raised this child with the maid. No mention at all of anything this great aunt would have felt. Yeah, look, I think that's unless they've kept a diary, which some people do, or letters, like Laurie has discovered. That's probably, in my opinion anyway, that's probably the only way that you will get that feeling of how, what people were experiencing back then. And yeah, so, but lots of people do that. Diaries, letters.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's usually the way. And this, I guess what this does is it brings us on to the idea of legacy, because one of the things that Laurie and I both have talked about is that we're also doing this not just for us, but for the people like us who will come later on. And we want to add to the story, build the story, and leave something for someone to then latch onto. And Vaz, what you've put in there is actually part of that. We want to build those stories up further. Wouldn't you
Yeah.
agree, Laurie?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, certainly I see that as as part of my legacy that I'm leaving. I don't know. I haven't had a lot of interest from younger generations. I keep hoping that somebody will come to me and say, gee, I'm really interested in this. Do you have some information? I'll be going, do I have some information for you? Um, Failing that if nobody does express an interest, uh, my hope, and I have to check this out, but I have a feeling that they would be receptive, would be to leave or stipulate in my will that my records, my old family photos and records and things that I've collected, should be sent to the local museum in the county where my family lived in Minnesota. They have quite a nice little um, local history museum there. The original letters are now kept there in the safe, and they do quite a lot of things to do. They have quite a collection of old local papers, and they do a lot of research for help people with family history research and that sort of thing. So that is probably where I would like to see my stuff end up if nobody else is interested in it. So, yeah. But I do find one of the nice things about researching it. People may not necessarily be interested in carrying on the research and continuing it, but people are interested in this sort of thing. I find my mother and her cousins, for well over a decade, they would have reunions every 5 years, kind of thing, in Minnesota and in Iowa, and in Michigan. And they would all get together, and some of my generation would tag along. And it's such a nice feeling to be with people you've never met some of these people before in your life, but I'm looking at all these people and I'm going, I know these people. They look familiar to me. And to hear, we talk about, like my grandfather and his siblings were their parents and grandparents. And so we can talk about them and, share stories and compare. People would bring old photos. And one of my mother's cousin's daughters is also very much into the family history. And she has the family tree printed out. And when you unscroll it, like she pieces it all together. When she unscrolls it, it's like 20, 30 feet. And she hangs it up and people will come and look at it and find their place on it. So I actually did up a tree like that for my husband's family, and took it to one of our family picnics. And it was so much fun to see all these children standing there and trying to find their place on the tree. So, people are interested in it, even if they're not actually interested in doing the work of finding out things about it. But and I always, whenever we have family gatherings, I bring along a notebook, or make sure I have some pen and paper. And when the old people start telling stories, I start writing things down, because I know I'm not going to remember it by the time I get back home. So
Yeah, I actually use my phone a lot. So my dad's in a care home now, and well, both mum and dad are in a care home. And one of the things I do is I videotape when dad starts telling stories. I videotape them so that when he passes away, I can then keep them as a repository of, I can transcribe them about his time when he was a merchant seaman and went around the world on oil tankers. It's fascinating, some of the places he went to and some of the stories he's got from Antarctica, Venezuela, things like that. So, yeah, one of the other things I'd like to talk about too, though, is about purpose. So, I hope by what you've been listening to so far, you're starting to get a feel that obviously Laura and I are quite passionate about this, and it does give us purpose. But it extends further than that as well. So apologies for my language. It's not me, but what I'm going to talk about is there is that the internet is allowing this, and sorry, what I should say is this is all about, Laurie coined the phrase finding your inner Nancy Drew, because you do end up being a detective of sorts, sorting through information, collating it, and following it through. And the skills that you learn from that can actually be used in other ways. So as an example, here in Australia, if you've listened to the podcast that I'm part of, or some talks I've been part of, I talk about this other podcast called The Lady Vanishes. Now, it's about a woman in Australia who, bear with me, it does have relevance. She went missing in 1997, and her daughter has been trying to find her for a long time, nearly 30 years. But what modern day technology has allowed her to do is amass an army of people around the world via this podcast, who then help her try to investigate where her mum is. Hollywood couldn't write this story, so I can't really go into it itself. But I reached out to them and said, look, I do family trees and this sort of thing. I've got some skills in this way. More than happy for you guys to make use of that. They're already way in front of the ball. They already had someone who was using these skills to add to the investigation. And so if you're looking for purpose, here is a set of skills that you could actually use to help other people. So I'm not quite sure if you're familiar with a TV show called The Keepers. I think it's on Netflix. It's set in Canada. We won't go into the subject matter, but it's a couple of women who are now middle-aged, who were trying to investigate the death of a nun that was at their school. There is obviously The Lady Vanishes. There's also another TV show called Don't Fuck with Cats, where, again, won't go into the subject matter, but it's about everyday people using skills to actually find a criminal. And it's fascinating. It's really, really fascinating. And so you not only are we collating stories, but it also gives you a set of skills that you could use in other ways to give you purpose and to help other people. It may not be your cup of tea, but it may be something that, I hope for those who may get a bit of inspiration from this, is something you really get your teeth into in a meaningful way.
Yeah, Yeah, and that reminds me, and I think I've told you this story, Michael, is that um, I have a friend, a childless friend actually, who is also interested in genealogy and has done a lot of research on her tree. And she has been putting her skills to use, helping other people with their trees. And she was telling me she went to visit a friend who recently moved into a 55 plus community. And she met a gentleman there who was like, I think he's 90 or 95 years old. And she was, talking with him about this. And he mentioned that he was interested. He would have loved to find out um, because he didn't believe that his father was his actual biological father. He just had this feeling that he had never belonged. So she offered to help him, and she had him do a DNA test, and looked at his results. Started from the information that he gave her, started tracing his tree, and she was able to determine that no, in fact, person he thought he was his father was not his biological father. She managed to figure out the identity of his biological father, and some of his some of his actual biological relatives. He got in touch with these people, and they have welcomed him with open arms. This, and he's a 95-year-old man who is not married, does not have children, and he does not have a lot of family around him. And he has a family who has welcomed him, and it's she said it just made her feel so good. Now, granted, not all that starts to wade into sticky territory about adoptees and people trying to find families. Sometimes you will be welcomed, and sometimes maybe not. But it is a skill set. It is something you can do. So yeah, it's
Yeah,
interesting.
no, absolutely. So one of the biggest highlights of my life is actually finding Vicky's dad. So Vicky's mom was very young when she had her, and the guy that was Vicky's father. These are back in the days when you didn't do that sort of thing outside of marriage. Was told to go away by the family, and he did, and never came back. And so it wasn't until Vicky was 50 that we actually found her dad, and that was through the DNA tests from Ancestry, using the Ancestry resources, and it's been an absolute roller coaster. It's yeah, don't think that it's all happy families sometimes, because it's not. It can be a real roller coaster, but yeah, one of the highlights of my life. And Sarah Bradley has just put up a question. Um, it said, if you could go back in time and meet one of your ancestors, who would it be and why? Um, I'm gonna. I'll steal the limelight here, Gloria, for just a minute. Can I say that I'm not really concerned about mine, but I would love to go back to some of Vicky's, because now I've researched her family tree. I have massive family tree envy, because it is so interesting. So her mother's family came from Derbyshire in England, via India in the time of the colonies, then to Australia, to this little village. When we found her father, he was a convict that came to Australia for stealing a pig in Ireland, and then worked on a farm here. When he became a free man, he bought land and became a landowner in a very affluent part of this where we live now. And I'd love to meet him. I would love to meet that guy that stole the pig, got came out to Australia, and then eked out a very successful life. So yeah, his name is Michael Gahan, and I would love to go back to meet him. What about you, Laurie?
Oh wow, yeah. That's a tough one. part of me, I would just love to go back and talk to my grandfather again, because there's so many times that, we're together as a family, and somebody has a question, and somebody would say, Grandpa would know. I wish we could talk to Grandpa. But beyond that, oh man, there's so many. I guess what one I would like to talk to somebody, and I'm not even sure if I can pinpoint an actual person, but many families have these persistent rumors, that they are related to royalty. Um, One of the family names that I would like to get to know more on is Parr. My great 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 grandmother was a Parr, and her daughter sent a letter with kind of handwritten family tree notes, and said, related to Catherine Parr, the wife of King Henry VIII, the last wife. And now Catherine Parr never had any children. So we're obviously not descended from her. But I suppose it's possible that somebody in that family line. But that would be kind of interesting to find out, if there is some kind of a relationship. I did find a DNA cousin. I have not contacted him yet, but I was looking at his family tree, and he has a tree that goes all the way back to yeah, we would be related to supposedly we descend from, if you follow his tree, we descend from an illegitimate son of King Henry VIII. Uh, and I did just a quick kind of Google of this guy's name, and there is some dispute. He's somebody who just popped up in the last little while as a potential child, and whether we are actually related to him or not, you really have to take some of these things with a grain of salt, especially when there's not a lot of documentation attached. But it's kind of fun to think about these things. There's another family story that apparently another branch of my family, that they were sailors, sea captains, and that they own land in what is now downtown Manhattan, and somehow got swindled out of the land. And there was actually a lawsuit apparently in the early 1900s that was filed to try to get some of this land back, or the title to the land back, and it turned out to be a scam. And apparently somebody actually was trying to solicit money from some of my great grandparents. And so that's another persistent rumor. And I was in New York, and where Trinity Church is down on Wall Street, supposedly that's where we're supposed to own. So yeah, I was like, this is where this is my
this
place.
Is mine. This is mine.
Yes. But yeah, I mean, I tend to take that with a very large dose of salt. So
yeah, there was Ancestry had this app a few years ago where they said you may be related to certain people. So for me, it was actually quite a lot of writers, C.S. Lewis, and a few others. But Vicky, we have traced some American lineage for Vicky back to Massachusetts. And then we've been able to, in around about the late 1600s, not around the time of the Pilgrim Fathers, the Mayflower, but after that, there were some people came across from the UK, settled in the United States. And yeah, Ancestry are telling us that Vicky's related to quite a number of American presidents, very distantly. But it's always good for a story. But yeah, you have to take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah.
So it's getting close to the hour. So please, if you have any questions for Laurie or I about family trees, we haven't touched on DNA tests, things like that. But I mean, we'll keep sharing stories. But please, if you've got any questions, fire them at us.
Yeah, I'm just looking at my own notes just to see if there's any points that we might want to bring out that we haven't. One of the things that Michael and I have talked about and that I jotted down was you start to and I guess maybe we brought it out a bit, but you start to realize as a childless person just how many childless people there are in your family and were in your family. I was actually talking this weekend to somebody, and we were talking about this the childless person. We were talking about this webinar, and they said that they had been quite hurt because they overheard a family member talking about the family tree, and that they were only recording people with children. And she's like, "So I'm not on the tree," and I'm like, if you don't record the people with children, you're missing out on an awful lot. And that's just it's going to be a pretty small tree in some respects. And you certainly, and certainly the more you learn, you will find out that some people that you thought might not have had children actually did, and and that there's actually a lot of people who did not have children. I actually checked into it. We know families are getting smaller. Um, and my maternal grandfather, the one who sort of got me interested in this, he came from a family of 9 children. He only had one brother who did not have children himself. The ones that did produced 27 children. That would be my mother and her first cousins. 5 of them did not have children. That's about 20%. The ones that did have children produced 47 of us. That would be, me, my sister, my second cousins, that generation. And I don't know all of them very well, so I don't know all of their stories, but I can think of at least 18, possibly more, of those 47 who don't have children. So that's like 38, almost 40%. Um, on my mother's side, grandma came from a family of 6. One of them did not have children. On that side, my mother was one of 12 first cousins. 4 of them did not have children. That's a full 1/3. The 8 that did have children, that would be, my generation, my sister, my mother's cousins' children. There were 18 of us, and 10 of those 18, which is more than half, do not have children. And most of us are, in our 40s, 50s, 60s, and so very likely not to have children. So that's some stats for you. I won't go into my father's side because they're a lot more fertile, but there are a couple of us on that side too who don't have children. So yeah, families are getting smaller. People are not having as many children or any children for a lot of different reasons, and I think we know some of the reasons, by choice and by chance. So that's it. We're not alone. Sometimes it feels like we're alone, but when you start looking at it, we're not alone. There's a lot of us out there, and sometimes even within your own family.
Yeah, I mean, as I said before about the catharsis, it's really helped me normalize, well, particularly my childlessness, by doing this. I have a number of branches. My dad's family emigrated to America, and there are a couple of branches there that I found that stop, and I'm really curious to understand why, but that's probably just too far away now, too far in the just in the distance to try and figure that out. But yeah, I was just thinking what you're talking about earlier about helping other people, because I have friends who know that I'm into this sort of thing. I've and obviously found Vicky's dad. Unfortunately, well, I should probably not leave you in the lurch, but unfortunately, it was a bit too late. He had passed away from cancer about 6 months before we actually found them. But she does have a really lovely relationship with a half sister, which has helped her a lot to understand where she's from, because she always felt incomplete, and now she understands, that where that part of her came from. And yeah, there's another particular woman that comes to mind. She's in New Jersey. Now, I didn't play too much of a role in this, but she's a DNA match for me. So if anyone's got any questions about DNA too, because I know some people are a little bit iffy about it. But anyway, she was a DNA match to me. I reach out to them all and go, oh, we're related. Would you like to explore how? And usually, by far, lots of people say yes, because they've done their DNA test for a reason, because they want to find out more. But her reason was that she was adopted. And so she was trying to find out who she was. And so I said, look, so she was sort of, no, well, I'm adopted. You're never going to know. I said, well, look, let's just try. So she allowed me access to her DNA test and her family tree. So then I also befriended one of her daughters via Facebook. And so we started to build a bit of a relationship there. And then one day it was like, I don't know, 4 o'clock in the morning. I've got up to go to work, and I thought, I'll just check the DNA list. Yes, it does get a bit of a compulsion at 4 o'clock in the morning. And there's a full blood sister for this woman. Now, Sari, her name is. She's not too, computer literate, so she doesn't delve into this a lot. So I knew that. So I'm on chat to her daughter going, get your mum to check her DNA results, because there's a full-blown sister. Quick. So, of course, the internet's running hot across the Pacific as messages being thrown left, right, and center. Anyway, what it does is it turns out that Sari's mum and dad were unwed, so she was adopted out. And then mum and dad stayed together and had 3 other kids. And so here she was for close to 60 years trying to understand who she was. And her parents have always told her siblings, yes, there is one of us out there. We don't know where she is, because everything's, all the records are closed. And so the 3 daughters, her sisters, were trying to find her, and eventually obviously did that through DNA tests. And it was although I didn't play much of a role in it, it was just beautiful to be part of. And now I've got somewhere to go. I've got an invite. Vicky and I've got an invite to go across to New Jersey and go and meet them one day, which I really can't wait to do. And so, yeah, look, if my parting message to this whole thing is, you just never know what doors this opens to you.
Yeah.
And I hope we've, been able to show that to you this evening or this morning, depending on where you are.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was a little reluctant to do my DNA, not because I was afraid of anything I would find out about myself, but I knew that there were some cousins out there who were adopted as infants, and that some people know about, some people don't. But my mother wanted to have hers done. She was quite curious. And so I said to her, okay, but if anybody pops up, you get to make the phone calls. And it's funny because the people that I was a little worried about, who, about popping out of the woodwork, and who knows how that would go over, have not so far been a part of my results. But there have been some surprises, fairly close relations, first cousins, second cousins, who show up in my results that we had no idea about. And I have decided, I'm for the time being anyway, I am not investigating. If these people contact me, then we'll decide what to do at the time. But yeah, it's an eye opener. You have to, DNA can tell you a lot. You can find out an awful lot. I've reached out to some people and been able to figure out a little bit more on some of the further back branches. But yeah, you may be there may be some surprises that will be good and some that you might be a little shocked about. You never know, so you just have to kind of be prepared.
Oh, I'm sitting here feeling quite antsy now, knowing that you've got DNA results. You don't know who they are. I'd have to write to them. I'd have to. I just could not
Let's
do
see.
that.
I've been able to make a pretty good guess how we're related, but yeah, I'm not about to open that can of worms at the moment.
Can I? Can I do it? Oh, please, come on, let me. Oh, okay. I've really enjoyed listening to your stories as a childless person. My family history gives me a true sense of belonging to a bigger picture, which makes me feel very secure. Your passion for the subject reinforces this feeling. Thank you. Oh, Sarah,
Oh,
look,
thank you so
I
much.
couldn't agree with you more. Um, it, I got the chance to go to Ireland 2018 um, with my dad's cousins, and one of those is another amateur genealogist for the family, and he took me. And this is where the Hughes family came from in around Dungannon in Northern Ireland, and yeah, he took me to the grave of what we believe was what we can trace back to the what we'll class him the first Michael Hughes, and it really cemented in me yeah, that feeling of being part of something so much bigger. So I couldn't agree with you more that it really does. Yes.
Yes. And this morning when I was having breakfast, I was thinking because originally we were thinking of doing this webinar on a different day this week, and Michael's going to be traveling at the end of the week. Um, so we arranged to do it today, and the theme is our stories, and our stories include the stories of our families, and sometimes that's for better, and sometimes that's not. Our family stories are painful, but learning more about our families for whether depending no matter what, sometimes those stories are good and sometimes they're painful, but it's all part of who we are. And I think the more that we learn about our families, and the more that we learn about what makes us us, and has influenced the way why we are the way we are. So that's another reason why I find it interesting.
No, absolutely.
uh,
Absolutely. Oh, look, we've done really well. It's 2 minutes too.
yeah.
Has
Actually,
anyone
I
got
have
any?
I have a quote I just want
Okay.
to end off with. I included it. It's actually from the novel Middlemarch, and I think it's actually the closing paragraph of the book. And I just think it speaks so much to the idea of legacy and the fact that we don't know the impact that we have on other people. Just like my Aunt Margaret in Beaverton, who had no idea that I'd be visiting her grave 70 years later. And the quote says, "But the effect of her being on those around her was incalculably diffusive. For the growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts, and that things are not so ill with you and me as they might have been is half owing to the number who lived faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs." So that's something to think about.
Absolutely. And such a fitting end. Thank you, Laurie. And you've
Thanks,
got
everybody.
bang on the hour. Well done.